For the first time, we could see the Great Sphinx in a drawing, like an architectural drawing, to scale. That took 3 weeks. But we couldn't use the photogrammetry to do a bird's eye view, a straight-on map.
The Great Sphinx of Giza has gazed over the desert for thousands of years, its enigmatic face a symbol of ancient Egypt's mystery. But what if we've been wrong about whose face it actually wears? Recent AI analysis has cast doubt on the long-standing belief that the Sphinx depicts Pharaoh Khafre.
When we look at the Sphinx, the first question we ask ourselves is who it represents. I think it represents the king Khufu, his face. First of all, because the face of Khufu was quite large.
Opening the door to questions that shake the foundation of Egyptology. What if the face carved into this colossal monument was altered or even belongs to someone entirely different? And what if the body beneath it dates back thousands of years before Khafre's reign? Questioning the Sphinx's identity. For over a century, the Great Sphinx of Giza has been widely accepted as the monumental representation of Pharaoh Khafre.
In the Sphinx stitch, and they defined a space that they say is a void under the Sphinx. It's approximately measuring 9 by 12 meters, and they called this space anomaly A. And so now I want to show you approximately.
His visage carved onto a massive lion's body, standing sentinel over the Egyptian desert. This assumption has been passed down as fact in textbooks and guided tours alike, creating a picture of absolute certainty. Yet, beneath this accepted narrative, there has never been concrete evidence directly naming Khafre as the Sphinx's sculptor. In fact, the monument itself carries no inscriptions or signatures pointing explicitly to its builder, a detail often overlooked in the rush to affirm the established story. In 2026, an AI system ingested every facial measurement ever recorded for the Sphinx, including decades of survey data and forensic comparisons. What it discovered unsettled even the most steadfast assumptions. The face of the Sphinx does not conclusively match the known statues of Khafre. This finding did not outright reject Khafre's identity, but instead returned the verdict of inconclusive, challenging a century's worth of accepted Sudanese history. For a monument so deeply entwined in Egypt's national story, this revelation invites us to press pause and reconsider what we think we know. The implications of such a challenge are profound. If the face we have revered is not Khafre's, whose could it be? And what does this mean for the chronology and cultural symbolism of the surrounding structures? The AI results awaken questions that ripple through Egyptology, questioning methodologies and biases embedded in past interpretations. This uncertainty ripples beyond statistics and measurements. It touches identity, heritage, and the narratives that have shaped global perceptions of ancient Egypt. This core enigma, the disconnect between the assumed and the measured, sets the stage for a deep dive into the evidence supporting the traditional attribution. Without any inscription or unambiguous historical record, the case for Khafre relies on indirect clues. Those clues have long served as pillars underpinning the conventional story, but as we shall see, they may not withstand closer scrutiny. The journey to unravel the truth does not discard the past lightly. It demands a candid look at its foundations. Before diving into the details behind the Khafre attribution, it's crucial to understand that many assumptions rest on interpretation rather than hard proof. The desire to place a famous name next to the greatest monuments is understandable, but it has the potential to obscure the complexities of the Sphinx's origins. Recognizing this gap between what is accepted and what can be explicitly proven helps frame the ongoing debate. This space between certainty and speculation is where the real mystery begins. What's especially striking is that the AI's inconclusive verdict aligns with concerns raised by some researchers decades ago, voices that questioned the face's identity quietly and were overshadowed by the dominant narrative. This isn't just a clash of technologies or new versus old scholarship. It's an invitation to reconsider historical certainties. The Sphinx, a monument carved from the earth itself, seems to guard secrets that resist the neat confines of established history. The question of identity also evokes broader political and cultural dimensions. This towering statue has become a symbol not only of Egypt, but of African heritage in general, which ties into long-standing discussions about who created Egypt's ancient civilization. Revisiting the Sphinx's identity carries weight far beyond its physical form. It challenges narratives that have historically sidelined African contributions and prompts a more inclusive consideration of the continent's ancient past. Underneath it all lies an enduring paradox. A monument so iconic and studied still withholds definitive answers about its origins and the face it wears. This paradox fuels both fascination and frustration among scholars and the public alike. As new tools like AI enter the scene, they disrupt assumptions once thought unshakable. This evolving technology provides fresh perspectives, but also highlights how much remains unknown. How tradition cemented this identity based on proximity, style, and interpretation rather than concrete evidence. Foundations of the Khafre attribution. The commonly accepted belief that the Great Sphinx was carved during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre primarily rests on a few key pieces of circumstantial evidence rather than direct inscriptions. One major reason is the Sphinx's close proximity to Khafre's pyramid complex on the Giza Plateau. This spatial association has long tempted scholars and historians to link the monument with the pharaoh whose tomb sits nearest, suggesting a shared construction campaign or era. Further supporting this is the stylistic resemblance between the Sphinx's face and statues historically attributed to Khafre, particularly those housed in the Cairo Museum. The assumption has been that the facial features, proportion, and royal iconography correspond with Khafre's known likeness. This connection has been accepted largely on visual comparison, an approach that was rarely subjected to rigorous, quantitative analysis until very recently. Then there is the iconic Dream Stela, erected centuries later by Thutmose IV, which rests between the Sphinx's paws. The stela recounts a dream in which the Sphinx requests excavation and restoration. Although this artifact references the Sphinx itself, it does not explicitly name Khafre as its builder. The damaged and ambiguous hieroglyphic text leaves room for multiple interpretations, yet mainstream Egyptology has traditionally read it as confirmation of Khafre's authorship. Notably, the absence of any clear signature or label carved into the Sphinx itself is striking, particularly for such an imposing monument. In Egyptian tradition, rulers often left inscriptions proudly naming themselves on monuments. The lack of such evidence here leaves a glaring gap that is often glossed over in cursory explanations. This evidentiary foundation shows a pretty heavy reliance on inference, where proximity and style kinda stand in for direct proof. The connection feels natural, but it is not exactly ironclad. You can see these clues as a puzzle that seems to match, yet the edges are still rough and not properly confirmed, which keeps the door open for other takes on the Sphinx's real origins. Scholars have argued about these points for decades, but the takeaway stays the same. Certainty was never really absolute. Even the earliest supporters of the Khafre attribution basically admitted that missing inscriptions make definitive claims hard, if not impossible. Still, the story grew legs in textbooks and popular culture, usually without stressing the scholarly uncertainties, or at least not in a clear way. This foundation also mirrors the historical context of Egyptology's development, tied to European exploration and interpretation in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Early archaeologists, trying to sort and explain huge amounts of material, sometimes preferred neat conclusions that fit existing frameworks, instead of sitting with ambiguity. The influence of tradition has since made it more difficult to question those baseline assumptions. If we evaluate this evidence side by side with the AI-driven analysis and other threads of inquiry, the gaps pop out even more. Once we understand how the Khafre attribution got built in the first place, we are better positioned to look at alternative perspectives that challenge, or at least complicate, this long-held belief. As these questions mount, it's worth looking back even further, before modern archaeology, to the earliest descriptions of the Sphinx's face, recorded by travelers without preconceived academic narratives. Historical descriptions and early observations. Long before Egyptology became a formal field, European travelers and scholars visited the Giza Plateau and recorded their impressions of the Sphinx's visage. Their observations, often unfiltered by later academic frameworks, provide a contrasting perspective on the statue's facial features. Strikingly, many of these early witnesses described the face in terms that differed from today's standardized images. For example, French writer Gustave Flaubert, during his 19th century travels, noted the Sphinx's thick lips and flat nose, features he associated with African physiognomy rather than the classical Egyptian royal ideal favored in textbooks. His candid descriptions reflected what he saw firsthand, unburdened by modern Egyptology's assumptions or political considerations. Similarly, the French scholar Count de Volney traveled in the late 18th century and made comparable remarks. He observed the irony that Europeans admired a monument bearing the likeness of Africans while simultaneously enslaving African peoples. His writings highlight an early recognition of the African roots symbolized by the Sphinx, a perspective rarely acknowledged in later Western scholarship. These accounts stand apart because they come from observers without a vested agenda to fit the Sphinx's identity into a particular historical narrative. They recorded physical realities that challenged dominant European assumptions about ancient Egyptian civilization's origins and appearance. Yet, their voices became overshadowed as Egyptology developed along lines that often sought to separate Egypt from the rest of Africa culturally and racially. The gap between these early descriptions and the pictures in contemporary textbooks makes it look like the Sphinx's face has been understood in a bunch of different ways over time, sort of steered by changing cultural biases and political circumstances. What used to be seen as just that gradually got filtered, remade, even rephrased through the lenses of race thinking and colonial ideology. Also, the notes left by those early travelers nudge us toward a key idea. The Sphinx's face story isn't frozen in place. It keeps shifting as human viewpoints and scholarship change. That kind of layered history makes it harder, not easier, to pin down the monument's identity and meaning, because what we call today's view is really only one part of a longer back and forth. People have been observing and reinterpreting it for centuries, and that ongoing conversation is still going. When we acknowledge this past, we end up reconsidering modern depictions and questioning our tendency to accept standard images as if they were final. It also ties into wider debates about African contributions to ancient civilization, conversations that early visitors seem to hint at, but which are still touchy and contested in the present day. In the end, these early impressions point to the value of coming back to the physical evidence itself. And now that evidence is being supported by technological advances like AI, which can evaluate the monument's features with a kind of precision that we didn't have before. By merging historical records with modern science, we basically open up a new chapter for trying to figure out the Sphinx's more true identity. The underexplored details of the monument's face and the voices from centuries ago compel us toward a future where evidence, not just tradition, guides our understanding. The role of AI in facial analysis. In 2026, a new chapter unfolded in the study of the Great Sphinx, when a research team fed decades' worth of facial measurements and imagery into an AI system unlike any that had been used before. This AI processed thousands of data points, including historic survey drawings and forensic analyses, to ask a deceptively simple question. Does the face on the Sphinx truly match the statues identified as Pharaoh Khafre? The answer challenged long-held assumptions, revealing a mismatch between the monument's face and the confirmed likenesses of the king. Among the most important prior work included in the AI's dataset was that of forensic artist Frank Domingo. Back in the early 90s, Domingo had used his experience from the New York Police Department to compare the Sphinx's face directly with Khafre's statues. His conclusion was that the jawline and facial angles did not align, a finding that briefly stirred controversy but retreated in the face of entrenched belief. The AI, however, brought a much more comprehensive analysis, amplifying those suspicions from one expert's intuition to statistically significant evidence. Dr. Miriam Ousley, a forensic analyst called to verify the AI's results, ran the facial proportions through her own professional lens. After double-checking the numbers, she described the outcome as inconclusive. That term was striking because it undermined over a century of near-unanimous agreement while avoiding outright rejection. It indicated that, based on measurable proportions, the Sphinx's face could not be confidently identified as Khafre's, nor could it be definitively ruled out. This finding matters more than just challenging a name. It brings into sharp relief the possibility that over 100 years of scholarship may have been overly confident about an attribution resting mostly on indirect evidence. The AI did not invent new doubts. It elevated existing questions by quantifying what human eyes and minds had only speculated about. It forced a re-evaluation of the assumptions embedded in Egyptology's foundational narratives. The significance reaches beyond academic debate. For many, the Sphinx's identity carries cultural and political weight, tied to the understanding of ancient African civilizations. A machine-driven transparency in these conclusions has the power to open conversations previously constrained by tradition or bias. It calls attention to the need for humility when interpreting ancient monuments, especially when past interpretations have been framed through narrow perspectives. Moreover, the AI's role illustrates how technology transforms historical inquiry, not by rewriting the past, but by sharpening our ability to see complexity and uncertainty clearly. This process also highlights the contrast between the empirical, data-driven approach and the subjective interpretations that have long dominated the field. It stresses that even the most iconic symbols of history can remain open to question. While the AI's inconclusive verdict stops short of a grand declaration, it acts like a chisel, gently carving away layers of certainty to reveal the ambiguous core beneath. This moment invites deeper exploration of the Sphinx's physical and historical context without rushing to closure. It revives the voices of previous skeptics and adds technological weight to their calls for reconsideration. From here, the conversation naturally turns to a question one of the foremost Egyptologists had already posed decades earlier. Could the face itself have been reshaped or altered? Exploring that possibility reveals an overlooked chapter in the monument's long history. The discoveries about the face's inconsistencies lead organically to examining the physical monument's structure, where experts have long noted the puzzling proportions between head and body. Evidence of reshaping and recarving. Long before AI entered the conversation, respected Egyptologist Rainer Stadelmann, former director of the German Archaeological Institute in Cairo, raised a critical observation about the Sphinx's appearance. He noticed that the monument's head seemed disproportionately small compared to the massive body beneath it, a discrepancy unusual for a sculpture intended as a unified whole. This mismatch suggested to him that the head might have been reworked or even carved anew after the original monument was completed. Stadelmann's theory proposed that the original face was altered and reduced in size, possibly recarved into a different likeness. This would explain the odd proportions and the sense that the head does not seamlessly align with the body's scale. His insight, based on decades of archaeological expertise, introduced a deeper layer of mystery to the Sphinx, implying that the visage seen today might not be the one originally intended. When the AI team modeled the geometry of the head against the body, their results echoed precisely what Stadelmann suspected. The automated measurements confirmed a lack of harmony between the head's dimensions and the massive lion's body, reinforcing the possibility of a later modification. This convergence of machine analysis and expert observation lends strong support to the idea that the face could have been reshaped long after the monument's initial carving. The motives for such recarving remain unclear and open to speculation. Some suggest it might have been a political act, changing the face to honor a different ruler or serve a new symbolic purpose. Others consider environmental damage or restoration efforts that profoundly altered the original features. Regardless, the notion that the head has a separate, possibly younger history than the body challenges traditional dating and attribution. This theory gains additional weight, considering that ancient Egyptian monuments were not static, but periodically restored and altered to reflect shifts in power or religious sentiment. Alterations of colossal statues were not uncommon, often used to erase or rewrite legacies. The Sphinx's recarving may thus be part of this wider pattern of evolving symbolism and political messaging. Further complicating the picture are debates over the monument's age, which are informed by geological evidence suggesting the body bears weathering inconsistent with the era of Khafre. If the body predates the head significantly, as some geologists argue, the recarving hypothesis becomes not just possible, but plausible. This divergence in dates widens the temporal gap the reshaping might cover. Understanding the implications of a reworked face invites a reassessment of how we interpret the monument as a whole. It highlights that the Sphinx has lived multiple lives, layered in meaning and physical form, shaped by more than one hand across centuries. The face we see might be just one chapter in a far longer and more complex story. Accepting such complexity opens space for new questions. Who carved the original face? When and why was it changed? And how does this reframing affect the cultural and historic weight the Sphinx carries? These are questions that modern technology and scholarship are just beginning to approach. As the discussion of reshaping deepens, attention naturally turns to environmental evidence, specifically geological clues, that might shed light on the monument's true age and origins, revealing even more about its mysterious past. Geological clues and dating controversies. One of the most provocative challenges to the accepted story of the Great Sphinx's origins comes not from art historians or archaeologists, but from geology. In the early 90s, geologist Robert Schoch studied the weathering patterns on the limestone enclosure walls surrounding the monument and made a startling observation. Instead of the typical damage caused by wind and sand erosion, he found evidence of heavy rainfall weathering, vertical, rounded erosion patterns consistent with centuries of intense water exposure. This type of rain erosion hasn't occurred in Egypt since well before the era traditionally credited for the Sphinx's construction under Khafre. This raised a fundamental question. If the Sphinx's body displays erosion from ancient rainfall that predates Khafre's time by thousands of years, could the monument itself be much older than the accepted 4,500 years? Schoch's claim suggests a radically different timeline, placing the Sphinx's origins in a much earlier climatic period. Although his conclusions sparked fierce pushback from many Egyptologists, they opened the door to fresh scrutiny of the monument's true age. The recent AI-driven analysis did not settle this debate, but it did incorporate climatic data and erosion modeling in its assessment. The findings showed that Schoch's rain erosion theory could not be ruled out, effectively reviving a once-dismissed argument and framing it as unresolved rather than wrong. This scientific openness adds weight to the possibility that the core of the Sphinx, the lion's body, could well predate Khafre's dynasty by millennia. This geological perspective profoundly complicates the simple narrative linking the Sphinx's construction to the 4th dynasty pharaoh. If accepted, it implies that the monument might be a relic from an archaic civilization whose identity is lost to time, carved during a dramatically different environment. This, in turn, invites questions about previously unconsidered cultures and histories that may have influenced or preceded the dynastic Egyptians. Moreover, the geological data harmonizes with the theory of the reworked head. If the body is physically and chronologically distinct from the face, this mismatch might reflect not just restoration, but a literal layering of civilizations. The ancient sculptors who carved the original body, and those who later reshaped the head, could belong to entirely different eras and cultural traditions. Despite resistance from mainstream Egyptology, the geological debate persists because it taps into the tantalizing possibility of a deeper, hidden history beneath the surface. It highlights how scientific disciplines like geology can challenge archaeological orthodoxy by bringing new types of evidence into the conversation. This intersection of environment and artifact pushes us to think beyond political narratives and cultural assumptions. Importantly, this controversy also underscores the complexity of dating monumental structures carved from natural bedrock. Unlike built temples or tombs, which can be dated by artifacts and inscriptions found within, the Sphinx's limestone block offers few direct clues about its exact age. Weathering patterns, therefore, become essential but complicated indicators requiring cautious interpretation. This geological conundrum propels inquiry along an uncharted trajectory, encouraging renewed fieldwork and interdisciplinary studies. It reminds us that ancient monuments are both products and witnesses of their environmental contexts, preserved yet vulnerable to natural forces through vast stretches of time. As this geological mystery unfolds, it reminds us too that some of the most persistent myths surrounding the Sphinx may rest on shaky foundations, inviting a critical look at stories we often take for granted. The long-circulated tale about the Sphinx's missing nose, for instance, offers a reminder of how easily myths can become entangled with history. Debunking common myths. Among the many stories surrounding the Great Sphinx, few have captured the public imagination as entrenchedly as the claim that Napoleon's soldiers shot off its nose during their 1798 campaign in Egypt. This vivid image of deliberate vandalism by French troops has been repeated widely in popular media and casual conversation. However, historical evidence contradicts this narrative and reveals a more complex reality. European artists and travelers documented the Sphinx without its nose long before Napoleon arrived in Egypt. Illustrations from the early 18th century, dating back to the 1730s, clearly show the statue's missing nose, disproving the claim that French cannon fire caused the damage. This points to an earlier event or process responsible for the loss, separating the myth from the documented timeline. One of the oldest surviving explanations comes from the writings of 15th-century Egyptian historian al-Makrizi. He reported that a Sufi holy man defaced the Sphinx's face in the 1370s out of religious zealotry, opposing local practices that saw the monument as an object of idol worship. Whether fully accurate or not, this account suggests that the damage might have been intentional and purposefully motivated, reflecting religious and social tensions rather than random violence. This perspective challenges us to think about how people closer in time and space to the Sphinx understood and interacted with the monument. For centuries, the Sphinx was not merely a tourist relic, but a potent cultural and spiritual symbol, inspiring reverence as well as opposition. Such deep-rooted engagement explains why its features might have been deliberately altered. The persistence of the Napoleon myth illustrates how easily catchy stories, no matter how inaccurate, can overshadow historical facts. It underscores the importance of returning to original sources, archaeological evidence, and credible accounts, rather than relying on popular lore. This careful attention allows a more nuanced understanding of the monument's human history. Furthermore, the damaged nose also symbolizes the vulnerability of ancient masonry to both human intervention and natural erosion. The loss reminds us that the Sphinx's form is not fixed. It has evolved through acts of preservation, neglect, and alteration. Each scar tells a story not just of the past's creators, but of all who came after. Understanding the true history behind the Sphinx's missing features contributes to a broader reassessment of the monument's story, highlighting the power of symbols and the contentious nature of cultural heritage. It opens up ways of thinking about the Sphinx not as a static relic, but as a living part of Egyptian and world history subject to human passions. This complexity invites consideration of what the Sphinx truly represents, not only in stone, but in the ongoing quest for historical truth. Implications and unanswered questions. The convergence of the recent AI facial analysis, the recarving hypothesis, and geological erosion studies presents a compelling yet complex picture of the Great Sphinx, one that unsettles long-held beliefs. For the first time, these three independent lines of evidence have been tested together within a single system, revealing patterns that resist easy explanation. None of the arguments collapse under scrutiny. Instead, they mutually reinforce doubts about the neat story of Khafre's authorship and the monument's age. This means historians and archaeologists must confront uncomfortable questions. If the face does not confidently match Khafre, if the head was possibly reshaped long after the original carving, and if the body shows signs of erosion from a much older climate, then what are we really looking at? These uncertainties reopen debates that were thought settled, forcing a re-evaluation of foundational narratives in Egyptology. It raises the possibility that the Sphinx's story is multifaceted, with layers of meaning and modification across millennia. One honest possibility is that the face genuinely belongs to Khafre, and that the inconsistencies arise from natural erosion, restoration attempts, or limitations in comparing weathered stone to statues crafted in idealized workshops. This explanation maintains mainstream confidence, but requires acknowledging significant uncertainties. It suggests the traditional attribution could coexist with factors that complicate direct identification. Alternatively, the head may be a later addition, a recarving imposed upon a much older body whose original face has been lost to time. This scenario fits with the observed disproportions and geological evidence. If true, it means the Sphinx might be a palimpsest, an artifact rewritten over time by distinct cultures or dynasties, each leaving a visible mark. That shifts how we understand its symbolic and historical meaning. The most radical possibility, still least embraced by mainstream scholarship, is that the statue predates the 4th dynasty by thousands of years, carved by people whose names, stories, or histories have not survived in any written records we have found. This challenges conventional timelines and invites a broader reconsideration of ancient Egyptian and African civilizations' origins. Each of these options carries profound implications beyond academic debates. They influence how we see cultural identity, the continuity and disruption of civilizations, and the narratives that have long shaped both Egyptian history and world heritage. Accepting that certainty is elusive, opens space for a more inclusive and dynamic interpretation of the past. It is also a reminder of the limits of evidence and the dangers of prematurely closing historical questions. The Sphinx, weathered, missing its nose, watching thousands of years of sunrises, invites patience. It demands meticulous measurement and honest inquiry over convenient answers. It warns against repeating inherited certainties without critical re-examination. These unresolved questions inspire ongoing research, encouraging dialogue across multiple disciplines: archaeology, geology, anthropology, and now artificial intelligence. They embody the richness of human history as an evolving story shaped by discovery as much as interpretation. The Sphinx remains a sentinel not only of Egypt's past, but of our quest to understand it. Ultimately, this analysis is a call to keep asking, to remain curious, and to value evidence wherever it leads. The true face of the Sphinx might still be hidden, but the search itself deepens our connection to history, reminding us that sometimes the mysteries matter as much as the answers. The Great Sphinx holds more questions than answers, challenging who we thought it honored and when it was truly carved. By examining AI findings alongside history and geology, we see the story is far from settled. If you value uncovering hidden truths and fresh perspectives, please like and subscribe to explore more journeys into the past.